Hey everybody, it's Dan. Welcome back and welcome to a painting video. If you're new here, welcome. In fact, if you're new here because of my shopping guide videos or my reviews and you're not familiar with my painting videos, also welcome. I don't paint very often and I've kind of adopted the philosophy of if I'm going to be painting anyway, it doesn't take that much extra time to just record myself doing it. I have kind of a unique painting style too, which is why I thought this might be semi-interesting. Which is coined Razzle Dazzle by some subscribers. And it essentially is like an army painter dip method with a couple of extra steps involved. So these miniatures are from the Young Seward lot that was sent to me, an Australian buddy of mine who sent a large lot of miniatures my way. And so I wanted to paint these up both because I thought they looked cool and because I wanted to test out a lamellar kind of glossy armor scheme that I intend to use on my Varangian Guard that I'm going to paint up. The Victrix Rus models that were armored, I'm going to paint up with like a lacquered red armor design. So I wanted to test it out here on this little batch of 15 models. So let's dive on in here. So the Razzle Dazzle technique involves blocking out mostly thin down colors, lighter colors like you would do with an army painter dip method, doing a very light dry brush of just pure white usually, and then washing the whole model. So I'm going through and blocking out the red color first, and in this case I'm using contrast paint just because I thought it would create some nice dark shadows in areas where I wanted it to, but you could just use like thin down Mephiston red. What you see me doing in the background there is what I do for all the other colors, which is I use about a 50-50 mix of Vallejo thinning medium and whatever color I'm using. In this case, the uniform color I wanted to be a neutral, and I debated between like a tan or an off-white. I ended up settling on a gray color. So that's Eshin gray mixed in with some Vallejo thinning medium to a pretty heavy consistency. And you can see it behaves a lot like a contrast paint. It just doesn't have as dark of shadows in the recesses, which is good because we're going to do a very heavy wash. It makes some of those areas too dark if you just try this method with contrast paint alone. So once that was done, again, a majority of the model is now blocked out because so much of it is just armor and uniform. So I'm going to go through and I wanted some nice contrasts, some accent colors in there. So I was going to use bone color for some things, but for the sash and the back of the, I guess I'd call it a cowl, the back of the Ashigaru's helmet, I'm going with Corax white. So it's technically a gray color, but it's like an off-white, very nice foundation color for anything that you want to ultimately be white. So I'm going through, this is also again thinned down with that Vallejo thinning medium. And the rule of thumb when you're using that stuff, it's fantastic. Even if you're not doing this, if you just want to like thin your paints down slightly, it's so much nicer than just using water. I had been using water up until probably the fall of last year when a subscriber recommended I try out this thinning medium, and I'll never go back. It's really fantastic stuff. But I add enough, and you can see here this is skin color that I'm adding, and then I think this is Morghast bone is the color that I'm using for those little satchels that are around the neck are actually charges of gunpowder and shot, so I painted those in Morghast bone. But I add enough Vallejo thinning medium that it's like just to the point where it starts almost turning like a gray color, and if you do that, you'll know that you've gone a little bit too far, so I usually end up adding a little bit more paint back in. But again, about 50-50 is, I think, the right ratio here for what we're doing, because we wanted, as I keep saying, to kind of behave like a contrast paint. And what that allows for is us to then boost the upper, brighter areas up with a light dry brush of white. This looks like Morghast bone. This is Xandri dust. This is my wood grain color that I use for spears, for sword handles, for, in this case, firearms, or the stock of the firearm. And this is the only color, I think I've said before, that is earmarked, by which I mean that it doesn't get used for anything except for wood grain. And I don't think I have really any other colors that are dedicated to one thing like that. But again, going through, slightly thinned down, and it doesn't really matter if you hit like the gun barrel or anything. You're going to come back in with metal to clean that up. And then I'm going to come in with black. This is a Abaddon black, also thinned down, you can see. And coming through and doing these sword scabbards. And then I'm also going to do the sandal, like the very bottom of the sandal, just to create, again, a little bit of contrast between the uniform, like the trousers, socks, and the bottom of the model there. The technique there is you want to kind of almost deliberately like hit the base. If you're trying to paint very thin areas like that, I find that's the best way to do it, is to kind of like hit the base and then allow kind of the edge of the brush to hit the sandal. Anyway, that works for me. Coming through now and doing metal color. I think this is Lead Belcher. from Citadel. So coming through and just doing metal. There's actually not that much metal on these figures, which is weird because I'm so used to painting like Dark Age and medieval figures that have like 75% of the model is covered in metal. But in this case, it's really just the stock of the gun. So I'm coming through and picking out all of that in metal, including the pieces there at the front that are kind of holding the barrel to the stock. And then this ended up being a mistake. I went with a gold color. This is Retributor armor on the like pennants, or I don't know what you would call those, on the helmet and on the chest, kind of those emblems. And I knew at this stage that I wanted to use some transfers, which I'll show off at the end, but I thought the gold might create a nice kind of rim of it looking like it was kind of surrounded by gold. But in the end, I found that it wasn't a strong enough contrast between the red and the color that I ended up using for the transfer. So I ended up coming back after I'm done watching the model and painting those in just white. But anyway, I did a little bit of, you can see the like the ties that are on the uniform there are done in like a bone color. And then I'm coming through, and this is kind of the trick before the dip or the wash, which is that I'm going to come through with a very light dusting of white, just dry brushing the entire figure. And you can see that's kind of just boosting up the areas. It doesn't look like streaks of white or anything like that. You can barely tell it's even there. But all it's doing is kind of like, yeah, hitting the upper areas of the model to brighten them up a little bit. And then what will happen once we wash the model is it's going to tone that down, and it's going to blend it in to whatever color that it's highlighted over to kind of, you know, blend those colors together. I don't really know how else to explain that, but that's what I'm doing there. And then once I'm done with this dry brush step, you can see I'm kind of going over multiple times on the same part of the model, because it's much better to do light dry brushes and hit it multiple times than one heavy dry brush, because the effect won't look right if you have any streaking. And I'm coming through now and doing some dot highlights just on some upper areas, paying particular attention to the white like sash and the cowl on the back of the helmet. And then otherwise, just picking out some areas like knuckles, anything that looks like sun might be reflecting off of it. Very tiny dots of white, which, as I just said, once it looks ridiculous here, but once you wash the model, it will then kind of tie it all together, make it look like a natural progressed highlight of whatever color it is that you're highlighting there. So again, be sparing with this stage. And what I'm also not doing is touching the armor, because I'm going to be doing a gloss effect on the armor. And so I don't want to have like contrasting or competing highlights. So I'm coming through now with, this is essentially Agrex Earthshade. There's a little bit of Army Painter dark tone, a little bit of Army Painter, like the dropper bottle acrylic washes. But you could just use either Agrex Earthshade or any other wash that you prefer. This started out with Army Painter dip, like actually dipping the model, which I think yields the best results. Like if you properly dip these figures, I just find it's kind of a pain unless you're doing lots of models at a time to bust it all out. But if you have Army Painter dip, I strongly recommend you give that a whirl. You're just going to need to do usually like 2 or 3 coats of matte varnish after you do that, whereas with this I can usually get away with 1 to 2. So, but otherwise, yeah, I'm just coming through, and you can see doing a very heavy wash over the entirety of the figure, being careful to make sure that nothing pools. It wants to pool on a lot of flat areas, so just be wary of that. But going through, making sure the entire model gets coated, even the areas that are black or very dark, it does have a subtle effect. That's why we like watered down the black a little bit, because it creates kind of a granularity that is nice when you wash the figure. So again, giving a nice heavy wash, not being afraid to then come back and wick away anything that you don't need. And here it is dried overnight, and you could be done there. I think that it looks pretty cool as it currently sits, but there are a couple of what I call tactical highlights that I come in just to boost up some areas. So usually it's just the skin and the metal that I pay particular attention to, because I think that's what the eye gets drawn to on the tabletop. So I'm coming through now with an AK Acrylics bright skin tone and just picking out just kind of the upper areas of some knuckles there. And I'm doing the same thing with metal. So I had used lead belcher before, I then washed it. Now I'm coming back in with a bright silver. I think this is Shining Silver from Army Painter, and just picking out some areas that looks like it would kind of have like glints of light coming off of. Now what I'm doing is I'm doing a matte varnish. I mentioned I do 1 to 2 coats of this, but I'm only targeting the non-armor areas, because I mentioned that I'm going to do a gloss varnish on the armor to make it look kind of lacquered. So I'm coming through and hitting everything that's not armor. It doesn't actually matter if you hit the armor, just don't, deliberately do, because it's just a waste of matte varnish at that point. But I'm doing all the skin, all the cloth areas, the non-metallic part of the gun, because again, if you throw matte varnish over a metallic, you can imagine what that would do to the shine of the metallic. So being careful not to hit the barrel of the gun there, but otherwise everything gets a nice thorough coat of matte varnish. I recommend Army Painter matte varnish if you don't have any. I've heard that the AK Acrylics matte is pretty good, and the Too Thin Coats matte is pretty good, so I'm going to be checking those out at some point next time I'm at my local hobby shop. But for now, I got Army Painter, and it's pretty fantastic stuff. So then once this is dry, and it doesn't take long, I'm going to come through with gloss varnish. This is just Ard Coat from Citadel. I also have, I think it's Liquitex, a gloss varnish from it, but there's like two tiers to Liquitex products. There's like the common one, and then there's the like fine art one, and I think the fine art one is the one I would recommend. But they're very cheap, at least per ounce or per fluid ounce, so that's something that if you're doing lots of gloss varnish, I recommend you check out the Liquitex stuff. But this is, again, just Citadel Ard Coat, coming through, giving a nice, thorough, even coat. I usually do 2 thin coats of gloss varnish over the figure, just because it will, if you do like too heavy of a coat, it creates kind of like a cloudy effect on the figure. So again, 2 thin coats is the way to go. And then this is the stage at which I base them up. I then went through and I fixed the like little talismans on the helmet and on the armor there. Painted those white, and then added the transfers. The transfers I mentioned are from Forgotten Chapters. I'll have a link down in the description to their site. I also have links to my guides on how I do all my basing and how I do paper banners, if those are things that you're interested in checking out. But otherwise, I'm really pleased with how these turned out. I think the effect is cool, and it's definitely something that I'm going to be utilizing on those Varangian Guard that I mentioned. So anyway, lots more to come, more shopping guides, more reviews, a little bit more painting content if this is something that interests you. But otherwise, I really appreciate you sticking around for this one. And until next time, happy gaming.